Marcus Thompson was not your average businessman. At just 34 years old, he had already achieved what many people could only dream of: a spot on the cover of Forbes magazine, a thriving tech empire under his leadership, and a reputation for being one of the most innovative minds in Silicon Valley. But despite all his accomplishments, Marcus knew that success didn't shield him from life's challenges. Some of those challenges came in the form of subtle biases or outright discrimination, reminders that even at the top, the world wasn't always fair. It was late Friday evening when Marcus finally boarded his flight back to New York after a grueling week of meetings in London. The trip had been exhausting but fruitful. He'd closed 2 major deals and secured partnerships that would propel his company to new heights. Now, as he stepped onto the plane, all he wanted was some peace and quiet. He glanced around the luxurious first-class cabin, appreciating the plush leather seats and spacious layout. This was one perk of his job he truly enjoyed: the chance to unwind in comfort during long flights. Marcus settled into his seat by the window, placing his briefcase carefully beside him. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, letting out a deep breath. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. Traveling in first class wasn't just about the extra legroom or gourmet meals. It was about feeling valued as a customer. Or so he thought. As the plane taxied down the runway and prepared for takeoff, Marcus opened his eyes and gazed out the window. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the sky. It was a beautiful sight, one that made him reflect on how far he'd come. Growing up in a small town where opportunities were scarce, Marcus had worked tirelessly to build a better future for himself. His journey hadn't been easy, but every obstacle had taught him resilience. And now here he was, flying home in style, ready to spend the weekend with his family. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the cabin crew began their rounds, offering drinks and snacks to the passengers. Marcus politely declined the beverage service, opting instead for water. He wasn't particularly hungry yet, but he appreciated the attentiveness of the flight attendants as they moved through the aisles, ensuring everyone's needs were met. That's why he was surprised and slightly confused when the woman assigned to his section approached him with an odd expression on her face. "Here you go, sir," she said curtly, placing a tray on the folding table in front of him. Marcus looked down and immediately noticed something was wrong. The bread on the plate was dry and crumbly, with visible patches of green mold speckled across its surface. Beside it sat a wilted salad, the lettuce leaves turning brown at the edges. A half-hearted dollop of dressing completed the unappetizing ensemble. Marcus blinked, wondering if he was seeing things correctly. Surely this couldn't be the meal they were serving in first class? He glanced around discreetly, observing the trays being handed to other passengers nearby. Their meals looked entirely different, fresh, colorful, and appetizing. One man received a perfectly grilled chicken breast accompanied by roasted vegetables. Another passenger enjoyed a bowl of creamy pasta topped with herbs and Parmesan cheese. Everyone seemed satisfied, chatting happily as they tucked into their food. Yet here Marcus sat, staring at what appeared to be leftovers from last week's catering mishap. For a moment, Marcus debated whether to say anything. Maybe there had been a mistake. Perhaps the flight attendant hadn't realized the state of the food before handing it to him. But as he studied her demeanor, he noticed something unsettling. Her smile was tight, almost forced, and her eyes avoided meeting his. There was no apology, no explanation, just a quick retreat as she turned to assist another passenger. Something about her behavior struck Marcus as off-putting, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it right away. Instead of reacting immediately, Marcus decided to observe further. He watched as the same flight attendant returned to refill drinks and check on other travelers. Each interaction seemed warm and friendly. She laughed lightly at jokes, offered suggestions for pairing wines with meals, and generally exuded professionalism. But whenever she passed by Marcus's seat, her demeanor shifted ever so slightly. The warmth disappeared, replaced by a coldness that was hard to ignore. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Was it possible that the moldy food was simply an oversight, or was there more to it? As someone who had faced prejudice before, Marcus was sensitive to the signs. He couldn't help but wonder if this incident was less about logistics and more about bias. After all, he was the only black passenger in first class. While he hated to jump to conclusions, the evidence was piling up in ways that were difficult to dismiss. Despite his growing frustration, Marcus remained calm. He knew that losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he decided to document the situation. Pulling out his phone, he snapped several photos of the moldy bread and sad-looking salad. Then, he jotted down notes about the timeline of events, making sure to include details like the flight number, the flight attendant's name tag, which read Sandra, and the reactions of nearby passengers. If nothing else, having proof would give him leverage later. As the hours ticked by, Marcus found it impossible to relax. The moldy food sat untouched on the tray in front of him, a glaring symbol of disrespect. Every time the flight attendant walked past, he felt a surge of indignation. How could someone treat a paying customer, especially one traveling in first class, with such blatant disregard? And why did it feel personal? Though Marcus didn't have all the answers yet, one thing was clear: this wasn't going to end quietly. Whatever the reason behind the incident, Marcus was determined to address it, not just for himself but for anyone else who might find themselves in a similar position. Because for Marcus, this wasn't just about a bad meal. It was about standing up against injustice, no matter how small it might seem. Marcus sat in his seat, staring at the moldy bread and wilted salad that had been placed in front of him. The tray remained untouched, a silent testament to the absurdity of the situation. He glanced around the cabin again, taking in the contrast between his meal and the fresh, inviting dishes being served to other passengers. It wasn't just the food that bothered him, it was the way it made him feel. Disrespected, overlooked, marginalized. And yet, Marcus knew that reacting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. He needed to handle this with precision and calm. Finally, after a few moments of contemplation, Marcus flagged down the flight attendant who had brought him the questionable meal. She approached his seat slowly, her heels clicking against the floor of the aircraft. Her expression was unreadable, neither warm nor overtly hostile, but there was something distant about the way she looked at him. "Is there an issue?" she asked, her tone clipped and businesslike. "Yes," Marcus replied evenly, gesturing toward the tray. "I think you'll agree that this isn't acceptable." He pointed to the greenish patches on the bread and the limp lettuce leaves. "This is moldy, and frankly, it's not fit for consumption." The flight attendant glanced at the tray briefly before shrugging dismissively. "Sir, I'm sorry if you're unhappy with your meal, but this is all we have available in first class right now." Her response caught Marcus off guard. Not because it was surprising. After years of navigating corporate spaces as a black man, he'd encountered similar dismissive attitudes before, but because of how blatant it felt. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but firm. "That doesn't make sense. Everyone else seems to be receiving perfectly fine meals. Why am I getting something so clearly substandard?" The flight attendant hesitated for a split second, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then, without missing a beat, she said, "Perhaps next time you should consider booking economy if you want more options." The words hit Marcus like a punch, to the gut, not because they were shocking, but because they confirmed what he had begun to suspect. This wasn't about availability or logistics. It was personal. The comment was laced with condescension, implying that someone like him didn't belong in first class, someone whose success might be seen as an anomaly rather than earned through hard work. For a brief moment, Marcus felt anger bubbling beneath the surface. He wanted to call her out immediately, to demand answers and accountability right then and there. But instead he took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. Losing his temper wouldn't help. What mattered most was gathering evidence and ensuring that justice would be served when the time came. "You know what?" Marcus said calmly, leaning back in his seat. "I'll let this slide for now. But trust me, this isn't over." The flight attendant blinked, seemingly taken aback by his measured response. For a split second, guilt flickered across her face, though she quickly masked it with indifference. "If you need anything else, just let me know." she muttered before turning away and walking briskly toward the galley. As soon as she was out of earshot, Marcus exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the interaction settle over him. He glanced around the cabin again, noticing that several nearby passengers had been watching the exchange with interest. One older gentleman seated across the aisle gave him a sympathetic nod, while a young woman 2 rows ahead raised her eyebrows in disbelief. Though no one said anything directly, their reactions told Marcus everything he needed to know. They saw what had happened, and they understood it was wrong. Determined to document every detail, Marcus pulled out his phone once more. He opened the Notes app and began typing furiously, jotting down timestamps, descriptions of the conversation, and observations about the flight attendant's behavior. He also made sure to note the names of witnesses who had seen the incident unfold. If he decided to escalate the matter later, having corroborating accounts would strengthen his case. But documenting the situation wasn't enough. Marcus wanted to understand why this had happened, and whether it was truly rooted in prejudice. To test his theory, he waited until the flight attendant returned to serve coffee to another passenger. When she passed by his seat again, he called her over, politely. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Could you please bring me a glass of water? This meal isn't going to work for me." She hesitated for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before nodding curtly. "Of course, sir. I'll be right back." True to her word, she returned a minute later with a small bottle of water, placing it on his tray without making eye contact. But as she turned to leave, Marcus noticed something telling. She lingered near the seats of other passengers, chatting amiably and offering refills. There was none of the warmth or attentiveness she showed them when interacting with him. It was subtle but undeniable, a stark reminder of the double standard at play. By this point, Marcus had pieced together the truth. This wasn't an isolated mistake or oversight. It was deliberate. Whether fueled by unconscious bias or outright racism, the flight attendant had singled him out for unfair treatment. And while Marcus had faced discrimination before, this instance stung particularly deeply because it occurred in a space where he should have felt valued, as a first-class passenger and as a human being. Still, Marcus refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his frustration into action. As the plane cruised steadily toward New York, he drafted a detailed email on his phone addressed to the airline's executive board. In clear, concise language, he outlined the events of the evening, attaching the photos he had taken earlier as supporting evidence. He described the moldy food, the dismissive attitude of the flight attendant, and the discriminatory remarks she had made under her breath. Most importantly, he emphasized the broader implications of the incident. "This isn't just about me," Marcus wrote. "It's about creating an environment where all passengers, regardless of race, background, or status, are treated with dignity and respect. Your company has a responsibility to uphold these values, and I expect immediate action to address this unacceptable behavior." By the time Marcus finished drafting the email, the plane was beginning its descent into JFK Airport. The lights in the cabin dimmed slightly, signaling the final leg of the journey. Outside the window, the New York skyline glittered against the night sky, a familiar sight that always filled Marcus with a sense of homecoming. Yet tonight, the view felt bittersweet. He couldn't shake the memory of the moldy bread or the flight attendant's cutting remark. They lingered in his mind, reminders of the work still needed to combat prejudice in even the most unexpected places. As the wheels of the plane touched down on the runway, Marcus resolved to see this through. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for anyone who might find themselves in a similar position someday. Because for Marcus, standing up against injustice wasn't just a choice. It was a duty. And as the plane taxied toward the gate, he knew exactly what he had to do next. As the plane came to a stop at the gate, Marcus gathered his belongings, his mind racing with thoughts about how to proceed. He had already documented the incident meticulously. Photos of the moldy food, notes detailing the flight attendant's dismissive behavior, and even timestamps of key moments during their interactions. But documentation alone wasn't enough. Marcus knew that if he wanted real accountability, He would need to act decisively and strategically. This wasn't just about calling out one person. It was about sending a message that discrimination of any kind would not be tolerated. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, Marcus unbuckled himself and stood up, his posture confident and determined. He waited patiently as other passengers began disembarking, observing the flight attendant as she assisted them with their carry-on bags and bid them farewell. Her demeanor was cheerful and polite, a stark contrast to the cold indifference she had shown him earlier. Watching her interact with others only reinforced Marcus's resolve. He couldn't let this slide, not when her actions were so clearly rooted in bias. Once most of the passengers had exited the plane, Marcus approached the front of the cabin where the captain was standing near the cockpit door. The captain, an older man with graying hair and a calm demeanor, was chatting casually with a few remaining crew members. When Marcus stepped forward, the captain turned to greet him with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir," he said. "Did you have a pleasant flight?" Marcus returned the smile but kept his tone serious. "Actually, Captain, I'd like to speak with you privately for a moment, if you don't mind." The captain's expression shifted slightly, curiosity flickering across his face. "Of course," he replied, gesturing toward the galley area. "Let's step over here." As they moved away from the other crew members, Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the chance to confront the situation head-on. Once they were out of earshot, Marcus launched into his explanation, speaking calmly but firmly. "I'm Marcus Thompson," he began, introducing himself. "I was seated in first class and unfortunately, my experience on this flight was far from satisfactory." The captain frowned slightly, tilting his head in co. By the time Marcus arrived at his Manhattan apartment, the weight of the day's events was beginning to settle in. The confrontation on the plane, the tense exchange with the captain, and the email he had sent to the airline's executives, all of it replayed in his mind like a loop. Though he was physically home, his thoughts remained tethered to what would happen next. Would the airline take meaningful action? Or would they brush the incident under the rug, offering nothing more than hollow promises? Marcus didn't have to wait long for answers. Barely an hour after walking through his front door, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from an unknown number, but something told him this wasn't a telemarketer. He answered cautiously. "Hello? Mr. Thompson?" came a crisp, professional voice on the other end. "This is Evelyn Carter, Vice President of Customer Relations at Skyline Airlines. I understand you reached out regarding an issue during your recent flight." Marcus sat up straighter, his attention fully focused. "Yes, Ms. Carter, thank you for calling me back so promptly." "Of course," Evelyn replied smoothly. "First, let me extend our sincerest apologies for the experience you endured. We pride ourselves on delivering exceptional service to all our passengers, and hearing that we fell short is deeply concerning. Can you please share more details about what occurred?" Though Marcus appreciated the polite tone, he wasn't about to let the airline off easily. Over the next several minutes, he recounted the entire incident, leaving no detail unspoken. He described the moldy food, the dismissive attitude of the flight attendant, and her discriminatory remark. He also reiterated the steps he had taken to document everything, including the photos, notes, and witness accounts. By the time he finished, there was a noticeable pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice tinged with both regret and determination. "Mr. Thompson, I want to assure you that this behavior is unacceptable and does not align with our company's values. Based on the evidence you've provided, and corroborated by the captain, we've decided to terminate Sandra's employment effective immediately. Additionally, we'll be conducting mandatory sensitivity training for all staff involved in customer-facing roles." The news brought a sense of vindication, but Marcus wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. "I appreciate the swift action," he said carefully. "But termination alone isn't enough. How do you plan to ensure that incidents like this don't happen again?" Evelyn hesitated briefly before responding. "We're committed to implementing systemic changes. That includes revisiting our hiring practices, enhancing diversity and inclusion programs, and establishing clearer protocols for addressing passenger complaints. We'd also like to offer you compensation for the inconvenience caused, whether that's in the form of a refund, future travel credits, or another arrangement of your choosing. Marcus considered her words thoughtfully. While financial restitution was nice, he knew it wouldn't address the root cause of the problem. What mattered most to him was ensuring that real change happened, not just within Skyline Airlines, but across the industry as a whole. "I appreciate the gesture," he said finally, "but instead of focusing solely on me, I'd prefer if you directed those resources toward initiatives that promote equity and fairness, perhaps partnering with organizations dedicated to combating bias in corporate settings." Evelyn sounded genuinely impressed. "That's a commendable suggestion, Mr. Thompson. We'll explore potential partnerships and keep you updated on our progress. In the meantime, we'd still like to compensate you personally. Is there anything specific you'd like us to do?" After a moment's reflection, Marcus made a decision. "If you insist, donate the equivalent value of my ticket to a nonprofit organization working to advance racial equality. I'll send you the details later." "Consider it done," Evelyn replied warmly. "Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention, Mr. Thompson. Your courage and leadership are inspiring, and we're grateful for the opportunity to learn and grow from this experience." As the call ended, Marcus felt a mix of emotions. Relief, satisfaction, and even a hint of optimism washed over him. The airline had listened, acknowledged their mistakes, and taken concrete steps to rectify the situation. But more importantly, they seemed willing to go beyond mere damage control and embrace lasting change. For Marcus, that was the ultimate victory. The following morning, Marcus woke up to a flurry of notifications on his phone. News of the incident had leaked online, thanks to a passenger who had witnessed the exchange and posted about it on social media. Within hours, the story had gone viral, sparking widespread outrage and discussion. Headlines blared phrases like, "Black CEO served moldy food by racist flight attendant," and "Airline takes immediate action after discrimination scandal." At first, Marcus felt uneasy about the sudden spotlight. He hadn't intended to become the center of a media firestorm. He had simply wanted accountability. But as he scrolled through the comments and reactions, he noticed something remarkable. Thousands of people were sharing their own stories of encountering bias while traveling, some subtle, others overt. Many expressed gratitude for Marcus's courage in speaking out, saying it gave them hope that things could improve. Realizing the platform he now had, Marcus decided to use it wisely. Later that afternoon, he released a statement on his company's official website, addressing the incident and its broader implications. In clear, heartfelt language, he explained why standing up against discrimination mattered, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole. He emphasized the importance of holding institutions accountable and urged others to speak out when faced with injustice. "I didn't ask for this to happen," Marcus wrote. "But since it did, I see it as an opportunity to spark meaningful conversations and drive positive change. Let's work together to create a world where everyone feels valued and respected, regardless of their race, background, or status." The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from colleagues, friends, and strangers alike. Several major news outlets reached out for interviews, eager to hear Marcus's perspective. Rather than shying away, Marcus embraced the attention, using each appearance as a chance to advocate for diversity and inclusion. He spoke passionately about the need for systemic reforms, sharing insights from his own experiences and offering practical solutions. One particularly memorable interview took place on a popular morning talk show. Sitting across from the host, Marcus radiated poise and conviction as he discussed the incident and its aftermath. "What happened on that flight wasn't just about me," he said, leaning forward slightly. "It was a reminder that bias exists everywhere, even in places where we least expect it. And while it's easy to feel powerless in those moments, I believe we have a responsibility to challenge the status quo, because every small act of resistance contributes to a larger movement toward justice." The audience erupted into applause, moved by his eloquence and authenticity. When the segment ended, Marcus received dozens of messages from viewers thanking him for his candor and inspiration. One message stood out in particular. A young black college student wrote to say that Marcus's story had motivated her to pursue a career in advocacy, despite the challenges she faced. Reading those words filled Marcus with a profound sense of purpose. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued to channel his energy into creating change. He partnered with Airlines to develop a comprehensive diversity initiative aimed at training employees to recognize and combat bias. He also launched a mentorship program within his own company, designed to support underrepresented professionals in leadership roles. Through these efforts, Marcus hoped to turn a painful experience into something transformative for himself, for his community, and for future generations. Though the road ahead was long, Marcus remained optimistic. He knew that dismantling systemic prejudice wouldn't happen overnight, but he also knew that every step counted. As he looked out over the city skyline from his office window one evening, Marcus allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. The journey had been challenging, yes, but it had also been worth it. Worth it because he had stood up for what was right. Worth it because he had inspired others to do the same. And worth it because, in the end, he had helped shine a light on the path toward a brighter, fairer future. The moldy bread incident on the flight had become more than just a personal grievance for Marcus. It had evolved into a catalyst for change. What started as a single act of discrimination turned into a nationwide conversation about bias, fairness, and accountability in corporate spaces. As weeks passed, Marcus found himself at the center of this movement, not because he sought attention, but because his actions resonated deeply with so many people who had faced similar injustices. One evening, Marcus attended a diversity summit, hosted by a prominent advocacy group. The event brought together leaders from various industries, activists, and community members to discuss ways to foster inclusivity in workplaces and beyond. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stepped onto the stage, greeted by thunderous applause. He took a deep breath, scanning the audience filled with